I have heard that guilty creatures sitting at a play have by the very cunning of the scene been so struck to the soul that presently they have proclaimed their malefactions. For murder, though it have no tongue, will speak with most miraculous organ. The play's the thing, wherein you'll catch the conscience of the king. Kirk's out for a night at the theater with an old friend who has a large bandage covering the entire left side of his face. The play they're watching is Macbeth, a play about a power-hungry leader who murders countless people. Kirk's friend Leighton tells him to pay close attention to the lead actor, Anton Karidian, insisting that he's actually someone called Kodos the Executioner. Kirk says that this Kodos is long dead. It turns out that Kodos had been the leader of a colony on Tarsus IV 20 years prior, and had had 4,000 people murdered under his governance. According to Leighton, only a handful of witnesses to Kodos' crimes still exist, including himself, Kirk, and Kevin Riley, aka Trash Son. At a cocktail party later that night, Kirk chats up a young lady named Lenore, the daughter of Karidian. Kirk and Lenore sneak away from the party, but just as they're about to kiss, Kirk discovers Leighton's dead body. The Enterprise leaves the planet with Karidian's acting troupe aboard, giving them a lift to their next destination. Spock acts all weird about Lenore for some reason.
Did it ever occur to you that he simply might like the girl?
It occurred. I dismissed it.
You would?
Why ever would Spock object to Kirk hanging out with a pretty lady? I can't think of a single reason. Then, with no explanation, Kirk has Trash Son transferred to engineering. Meanwhile, he continues to flirt with Lenore while Spock gets more and more worried about Kirk's actions. Spock finally puts two and two together and figures out Kirk's actions must have something to do with Tarsus IV. A food shortage had caused Kodos to declare martial law and have half the population of the Earth colony slaughtered to save the other half. Kodos had split the colony up between who he deemed genetically superior and who was expendable. Kirk was one of the ones allowed to live. I just want that to sink in for a second. James Tiberius Kirk, as a child no less, survived a genocide.
Eating is a pleasure, sir. Unfortunately, one you will never know. Perhaps, but I will never starve, sir.
Spock and Bones figure out that Kirk now suspects that Anton Karidian is Kodos and that he's brought Karidian and his acting troupe aboard to keep a close eye on him. Spock reveals that of the few eyewitnesses to Kodos' crimes, only Kirk and Riley are still alive. Meanwhile, an assassination attempt is made on Riley down in engineering. Spock and McCoy are now convinced that Karidian is knocking off the remaining witnesses, and now Kirk is next. But Kirk just isn't sure if Karidian really is Kodos or not, and doesn't want to just jump into taking action. Kirk is basically in the same predicament as John Mulaney in that would you kill Hitler bit.
And I see like an old man who I think might be Hitler, based on my memory of what Hitler looks like. I'm not gonna kill that guy either, because I am often wrong. I'd murder him, and then people would run up and be like, whoa, you just killed an old man. And I'd be like, he looked like Hitler.
Suddenly, as Spock is confronting Kirk about Karidian and his quarters, they realize a phaser set to overload has been hidden in Kirk's room. Luckily, they dispose of the bomb just in time. Kirk finally decides that it's time to confront Karidian. Kirk asks Karidian outright if he's Kodos, and Karidian is like, maybe I am, maybe I ain't. Karidian points out that if he is Kodos, the only point of punishing him now would be vengeance, not justice. Lenore walks in on their conversation and tells Kirk off for being unmerciful to the man who murdered 4,000 people. Yeah, how dare he? In sickbay, Riley has recovered and overhears Bones say that Karidian is Kodos. Riley escapes to kill Kodos for the murder of his family. Meanwhile, Karidian and his troupe are performing Hamlet for the Enterprise crew. Backstage, Karidian tells Lenore that the guilt is becoming too much for him, and Lenore says he won't have to worry about his past coming back to haunt him any longer. It turns out that Lenore is the one who has been killing the witnesses to Kodos' crimes to protect her father, and she plans to get rid of the last two, Kirk and Riley, tonight after the play. Karidian is horrified at this. Oh sure, the death of thousands you could give less of a about, but the deaths of maybe half a dozen people? Too much bloodshed. Kirk overhears and attempts to arrest them both, but Lenore snatches a phaser from a guard's belt. She shoots at Kirk and Karidian takes the shot. Lenore has a psychotic breakdown at having killed her own father and is taken away. Kodos is the Trek versus version of Thanos, sharing the same ideology that killing half the population will save the other. The ends justify the means. This is a philosophy known as consequentialism, the idea that any act is justifiable if the result is for the better. The Tarsus IV colony was in a bad situation where there was no right answer, so Kodos made a choice. But who in their right mind can justify the slaughter of thousands? The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the many? That's not how the line goes. This would be like Trump having all those infected with coronavirus executed tomorrow to stop the spread of the disease. Yes, it fixes the problem, but it's clearly the wrong thing to do.
Why did I say that? Now I'm gonna give people ideas.
And it needs to be remarked that Kodos' actions weren't purely utilitarian. Remember, he did choose who survived the culling by what he deemed as genetic superiority. The practice of weeding out subjectively undesirable traits in a person or a population is called eugenics, and the topic of eugenics comes up several times in Star Trek. For example, Geordi LaForge from TNG is a blind man, which has often raised the question among fans, why or how do disabled people still exist in the 24th century?
Guess if I had been conceived on your world, I wouldn't even be here now, would I?
No.
No, I'd have been terminated as a fertilized cell.
It was the wish of our founders that no one have to suffer a life with disabilities.
Who gave them the right to decide whether or not I should be here?
Deciding that someone doesn't deserve to exist or that they need to be fixed based on one person's or a small group's idea of perfection is called eugenics, Becky, and we as a society decided a long time ago that that's not okay. After all, what's to stop a eugenicist from deciding that non-white races need to be bred out next? You know, there was another guy in history I can think of who thought that disabled people, the elderly, the gays, the Jews, and basically anyone who wasn't a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white person shouldn't be allowed to live either. But let's switch gears and discuss Karidian's relationship to his daughter Lenore. In Macbeth, Karidian plays the titular character and Lenore plays his wife, Lady Macbeth, which is a little gross. It's revealed that Lenore was the one killing the witnesses and not Karidian, like Kirk and everyone else suspected, because Lenore is so devoted to her father. She doesn't seem to care that he's murdered thousands. It's almost like she has a pre-obsession with him. The Greek playwright Sophocles wrote of Electra, the daughter of Agamemnon, who plotted to kill her mother and stepfather to avenge the death of her father because her love for him was all-encompassing. In other words, she was Daddy's little girl. In 1913, Carl Jung first coined the term Electra complex to describe the phenomenon of girls being subconsciously attracted to their fathers, a reverse of the Oedipal complex. You know the old adage about a girl wanting a guy who reminds them of their dad. Now obviously this theory as it applies to real women is a bunch of Freudian malarkey. However, I think reading Lenore as having an Electra complex isn't totally unreasonable. But speaking of plays, the one to keep in mind when speaking of the conscience of the king is, of course, Hamlet, the Shakespeare play from which the episode takes its name.
Alas, poor Yorick.
In Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark comes home from college. His father, the king, has died, and his mother has married Hamlet's uncle Claudius. But the ghost of Hamlet's father appears to him and tells him he was murdered by Claudius. The rest of the play follows Hamlet as he struggles to decide whether or not to kill his uncle. The whole episode is like an adaptation of the play. Kirk is Hamlet, Kodos is Claudius, Lenore is Laertes, who ultimately ends up killing Hamlet. Bones is Horatio, Hamlet's bestie and confidant. Bones' full name is even Leonard Horatio McCoy, which leaves Spock to be Ophelia, who frets over Kirk's actions in the episode the same way Ophelia worries about Hamlet over the course of the play. While Hamlet more or less focuses on Hamlet and follows his investigation all the way through, the conscience of the king is set up more like a murder mystery, with the plot only showing you bits and pieces that are meant to mislead you before the big reveal that Lenore is the actual killer. It's excellent. Spock and Bones act as Watson to Kirk's Holmes. His thought process is a mystery until the end of the second act of the episode, and we don't learn that the murderer is Lenore until the very end. It's a twist. In Hamlet, we learn who killed Hamlet's father in the very first act, and the rest of the play is more or less an existential crisis for Hamlet. One thing I don't get throughout this entire episode is why everyone is acting like the statute of limitations is passed on Kodos' actions, which, may I remind you, is the slaughter of 4,000 people, and that Kirk should just let Karidian go, even if he is Kodos, because he's an old man now, and it wouldn't bring back those slaughtered people anyway. And I'm like, why?
I'm interested in justice.
Are you? Are you sure it's not vengeance?
No, Bones, it is about justice. Maybe Kirk does have a personal beef with Kodos. So, he's fucking entitled to it. The man survived a goddamn genocide!
What if you decide he is Kodos? What then? Do you play God, carry his head through the corridors in triumph? That won't bring back the dead, Jim.
Yeah, obviously it won't bring back the dead. I'm not saying Kirk should kill him, but he should at least answer for his crimes. It's not like he just killed one person. He killed half of an entire community. You don't just forget and forgive the deaths of 4,000 people. To put that into perspective, more people died on Tarsus IV than on 9/11. The people in this episode are basically following the ideology of an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Well, this isn't about an eye for an eye. This is about an eye for 4,000 eyes. The quality of mercy may not be strained, but letting a man with that much blood on his hands walk away would be tantamount to criminality.